When people imagine royal women of the past, they picture silk gowns, gold crowns, and perfect manners. They imagine clean halls and graceful lives. But hidden beneath the heavy, puffy dresses was a reality few historians like to discuss. A reality that followed these women every month. One that caused pain, fear, and humiliation, especially inside royal courts where perfection was demanded at all times. Periods were not private for royal women. In fact, they were political. A queen's body did not belong to her. It belonged to the crown. Her ability to bleed, stop bleeding, conceive, or fail to conceive was watched closely. Servants, ladies-in-waiting, physicians, and sometimes even priests knew when her cycle began. A missed period could start rumors of pregnancy or worse, accusations of infertility. In medieval and early modern Europe, puffy dresses were not just fashion, they were armor. Layers of skirts, underskirts, hoops, and padding hid stains, smells, and discomfort. These dresses could weigh over 20 kilograms. During a period, wearing them was torture. There were no modern pads or tampons. Royal women relied on folded cloths made from linen or wool. These were tucked between the legs or tied with strings to belts worn under the dress. They shifted when walking. They soaked quickly, and they were rarely comfortable. Changing them was a nightmare. A queen could not simply excuse herself. Every movement was observed. Going to a private chamber required permission and escort. If blood leaked through the layers, it was not just embarrassing, it was dangerous. Blood was seen as impure. Some believed menstrual blood carried sickness or evil energy. A visible stain could lead to whispers that a woman was weak, cursed, or unfit to rule. To prevent leaks, some royal women barely moved during their periods. They canceled appearances. They sat for hours without standing. This caused cramps, infections, and long-term health problems. But appearing in public while bleeding was unthinkable. The smell was another fear. Without proper hygiene, menstrual blood could produce a strong odor, especially when trapped under heavy fabric. Royal women were obsessed with masking it. They used perfumed cloths, herbs, rosewater, lavender, and even vinegar. Some stitched scented sachets into their dresses. Others burned incense constantly in their rooms, not for luxury, but to hide reality. Doctors made things worse. Medical beliefs about menstruation were brutal. Many physicians believed periods were a way for women to release bad blood. If bleeding was heavy, it was considered normal and healthy. If it was painful, women were told to endure it. Treatments included bloodletting, purging, and drinking bitter herbal mixtures that often increased bleeding. Some royal women were forced to follow strict diets during their periods. Cold foods were forbidden, baths were discouraged, exercise was limited. All of this trapped discomfort inside already exhausted bodies. But the most disturbing part was this: periods were monitored. Royal records showed that ladies-in-waiting sometimes kept track of the queen's cycle. This information was passed quietly to advisors. If a queen bled too often, she was considered weak. If she bled too little, she was suspected of infertility or pregnancy. Either could change alliances, marriages, or succession plans. A natural bodily function became a state secret. Behind the massive skirts and jeweled bodices, royal women lived in constant anxiety. Fear of stains, fear of judgment, fear that their own bodies would betray them in a court that offered no mercy. And this was only the beginning. Because in some courts, royal women went even further, using dangerous methods to control, hide, or even stop their periods entirely. And those methods would leave scars that never healed. For many royal women, hiding a period was not enough. The real goal was far more extreme: to stop it altogether. In royal courts, menstruation was treated as a weakness. A bleeding queen was seen as fragile, unstable, less capable of ruling or producing heirs. So physicians and advisors searched for ways to control the cycle even if it meant risking a woman's life. The methods they used were disturbing. One common practice was forced suppression through herbs. Royal doctors prescribed strong plant mixtures meant to cool the womb or dry the blood. These included pennyroyal, mugwort, savin, juniper, and hellebore. Today, many of these plants are known to be toxic. Taken repeatedly, they damage the liver, kidneys, and reproductive organs. Royal women drank these brews in silence. The pain was intense: nausea, dizziness, severe cramps. Some women fainted during court gatherings, but were quickly removed and blamed for being delicate. No one questioned the medicine. Another method was tight body binding. Corsets were already cruel, but during menstruation, they were tightened further. The belief was that pressure on the abdomen could slow or stop bleeding. Women were laced until breathing hurt. Internal organs shifted. Blood flow was restricted. Infections became common, but appearances mattered more than health. Some queens were instructed to avoid bleeding during travel or ceremonies at all costs. For major events, coronations, weddings, diplomatic meetings, physicians increased dosages of suppressing herbs weeks in advance. The result was often irregular cycles, internal bleeding, or sudden hemorrhages later. Then there was the most frightening practice of all, intentional cleansing. If a woman's period was irregular, doctors believed bad blood was trapped inside her. To fix this, they performed aggressive treatments, purging the bowels, inducing vomiting, or applying leeches to the thighs or vulva. These procedures were humiliating and painful. They were done without consent, often in front of attendants. Royal women endured it because refusing was not an option. Periods were also controlled through fear. Many queens were warned that bleeding too much would make them unattractive to their husbands, that it would lower desire, that it could make a king seek another woman. This fear pushed them to obey every instruction, no matter how dangerous. Ironically, suppressing menstruation often destroyed fertility, the very thing royal women were valued for. Scar tissue, infections, and hormonal damage left many unable to conceive. When this happened, the blame fell entirely on them. Never the doctors, never the system. There are records of queens who stopped bleeding for years, only to collapse suddenly from internal complications. Others developed chronic pain that followed them until death, but their suffering remained hidden beneath layers of fabric and protocol. And yet, despite all this, periods were never truly private. Because in some courts, the blood itself became evidence used to judge loyalty, morality, and even purity. In royal courts, a woman's blood was never just blood. It was evidence. Evidence of fertility, evidence of purity, evidence of obedience. For royal women, menstruation was not only painful and dangerous, it was closely watched. In many European courts, queens and princesses were surrounded by ladies-in-waiting who served a darker purpose. These women dressed them, bathed them, and handled their undergarments. This meant they knew exactly when bleeding started, how heavy it was, and when it ended. Nothing stayed secret. Soiled cloths were sometimes examined not officially, but quietly. A lady-in-waiting might report concerns to a senior court official. That information traveled upward. If blood appeared too dark, too light, or too frequent, rumors followed. A queen who bled wrong became a problem. Menstrual blood was deeply feared. Medieval and early modern belief systems treated it as powerful and dangerous. Some thought it could rot crops, poison wine, or cause illness in men. Others believed it held magical energy that could be used in curses or love spells. Because of this, royal women were often isolated during their periods. They were discouraged from touching sacred objects. In some courts, they were asked not to attend religious ceremonies. Communion was sometimes forbidden. This created a quiet humiliation, being visibly present, yet spiritually excluded. Even worse was how blood was linked to sexual morality. If a royal woman bled outside her expected cycle, whispers of adultery began. She stopped bleeding after marriage, pregnancy rumors spread immediately. A delay could excite hope or trigger panic. If no child followed, suspicion returned stronger than before. Some queens lived under constant surveillance because of this. In certain royal households, menstrual tracking became routine. Calendars were kept, dates were noted. This allowed advisors to calculate fertile windows, pushing kings to visit their wives at specific times, turning intimacy into duty. But blood was also used to accuse. If a woman suffered miscarriage, it was sometimes labeled a natural purge rather than the loss of a child erasing her grief. In darker cases, excessive bleeding was blamed on immoral behavior or divine punishment. Royal women were rarely allowed to explain their own bodies. The pressure created paranoia. Some women tried to hide bleeding altogether, risking infection. Others attempted to fake cycles using animal blood or dyed cloth, terrified of what would happen if they were discovered as irregular. Failure was not forgiven. A queen whose body did not behave as expected could be replaced. Divorce, annulment, confinement, or exile were real outcomes. History remembers the political reasons, but beneath them were bodies pushed beyond their limits. And all of this happened while wearing massive, puffy dresses designed to project elegance and control. The fabric hid stains, but it could not hide fear. Because in the most powerful courts, royal women were not only watched, they were judged by blood, sometimes punished for it. In Part 4, we will uncover the extreme hygiene practices and humiliating rituals royal women endured to prevent visible bleeding, and how these practices often caused lifelong damage. In royal courts, cleanliness was not about comfort. It was about control. A single stain on a puffy dress could spark rumors, insults, or loss of respect. So royal women were pushed into extreme hygiene practices, many of which did more harm than good. Bathing during menstruation was often discouraged. Doctors believed warm water could increase bleeding or weaken the womb. Some warned that water could open the body and allow sickness inside. As a result, royal women were expected to remain dry, even while bleeding heavily. Instead of bathing, they were wiped. Servants cleaned them with damp cloths soaked in vinegar, wine, or herbal mixtures. These liquids burned sensitive skin. Vinegar was especially common because it was believed to kill impurities and odors. In reality, it caused irritation and infections. The cloths used for menstruation were reused. Linen rags were washed and dried in private rooms, often by the same women who attended the queen daily. Washing did not mean sterilizing. Without boiling or proper soap, bacteria remained. Infections were frequent, yet rarely treated properly. To prevent leaks, some royal women wore multiple layers of padding. Thick folded cloths were stacked together, tied tightly with ribbons or belts. This restricted movement and trapped moisture. Skin breakdown and sores were common. Still appearing fresh was demanded. Perfumes were applied directly to the body. Rose oil, musk, ambergris, and clove were used not just on clothing, but on skin and undergarments. These substances masked smell, but irritated tissue. Long-term use caused rashes and swelling. One disturbing practice involved internal deodorizing. Some physicians advised inserting scented sponges or cloths into the body to absorb blood and odor. These were early, unsafe tampon-like devices. Left inside too long, they caused severe infections. But royal women followed instructions, fearing embarrassment more than pain. Rooms were also treated. During menstruation, a royal woman's chambers were filled with burning herbs and incense. Rosemary, juniper, and sage were burned constantly. This was meant to purify the air. It also masked the smell of blood and reminded everyone that something unclean was happening. This constant focus on cleanliness sent a cruel message: your body is a problem. Even illness was hidden. If a queen developed fever, cramps, or discharge from infection, it was described as female weakness rather than medical emergency. Doctors treated symptoms quietly to avoid scandal. Some women lost the ability to walk without pain. Others suffered chronic infections that followed them for life. But as long as their dresses remained spotless, the court remained satisfied. The dresses themselves were part of the torture. Puffy gowns trapped heat and moisture. Hoop skirts made sitting awkward. Standing for long ceremonies while bleeding caused dizziness and fainting. When this happened, women were blamed for lacking discipline. No one blamed the system. Royal women were expected to be flawless, statues, silent, composed, and clean while their bodies fought against unnatural expectations. And when cleanliness failed, the punishment was not mercy. In Part 5, you'll see how menstruation influenced marriage, sex, and power, and how royal women were pressured to perform even while bleeding, because duty never stopped. Marriage did not protect royal women from humiliation. In many cases, it made everything worse. For queens and princesses, marriage was not about love. It was about heirs. And that meant their bodies were under constant pressure even during menstruation. Periods were supposed to follow rules. Royal doctors and advisors calculated fertile days. Kings were encouraged to visit their wives at precise times. But cycles were unpredictable, especially under stress, illness, or suppression methods. When bleeding did not align with expectations, blame fell on the woman. There was no room for rest. Some royal women were expected to perform marital duties even while bleeding. Medical beliefs varied, but political pressure often outweighed caution. Refusing a king was dangerous, Saying "I am unwell" could be interpreted as disobedience or rejection. To hide the blood, extreme measures were taken. Extra cloth padding was used, bed sheets were layered, perfumed oils were applied heavily. In some cases, dark fabrics replaced white linen to conceal stains. Servants cleaned silently afterward, erasing evidence. The emotional toll was severe. Many women lived in constant fear of being discovered as defective. If a marriage failed to produce an heir, menstruation became part of the accusation. A woman who bled regularly but did not conceive was considered barren. A woman who bled irregularly was considered unstable. Either way, she lost. Periods were also tied to control of movement. During menstruation, some queens were discouraged from traveling or attending court. But if political needs demanded presence, they were forced to appear regardless of pain. Standing for hours in heavy dresses while bleeding caused fainting and long-term damage. Pregnancy brought no relief. If a woman missed her period, the court reacted instantly. Hope surged. Preparations began. If bleeding returned, disappointment turned cold. Miscarriages were treated as failures, not tragedies. Some women blamed themselves for bleeding. Letters from royal women reveal guilt and shame feelings planted by a system that treated menstruation as a flaw. They believed their bodies were betraying their duty to the crown. The cruel irony was this: the stress and abuse surrounding menstruation often prevented conception. Chronic infections, hormonal damage from herbs, and physical trauma from corsets and treatments made pregnancy difficult, yet the pressure increased instead of stopping. And when a royal woman could no longer fulfill expectations, solutions were swift. Mistresses were encouraged. Annulments were discussed. Younger brides were proposed. The bleeding woman was pushed aside, still dressed in silk, still silent. Because in royal history, a woman's worth was measured by blood. And when that blood no longer served the crown, she became disposable. The mental toll of life as a royal woman cannot be overstated. Beyond the physical torment of heavy dresses, blood-soaked cloths, and toxic herbs, there was constant psychological pressure. Royal women were trapped in a world that judged every drop of blood, every cramp, every natural reaction of their bodies. And that judgment often came from the people closest to them, the ladies-in-waiting, the court physicians, and even their own families. Shame became a constant companion. Queens wrote in private letters about fear of being exposed, of letting the court see the impure blood that betrayed them. Some women refused to speak openly about discomfort because admitting pain was a sign of weakness. Complaints could lead to punishment or worse, the impression that they were failing in their duty. Many suffered in silence for years. Historical accounts hint at women who fainted from blood loss, who developed infections, or who endured crippling cramps but continued attending ceremonies. The courts praised their composure, but behind closed doors, these women were breaking. Some reached a breaking point. Records from European courts tell of women who rebelled quietly. One princess refused the repeated blood-suppressing herbs prescribed by her physician despite threats. A queen openly rejected certain hygienic rituals, forcing her attendants to find alternative solutions. These acts of defiance were subtle, rarely celebrated, but they were victories in a world that offered none. Yet even rebellion came at a cost. Those who defied the system risked gossip, exile, or being labeled difficult. In extreme cases, mental breakdowns occurred. Royal women were sometimes confined to private chambers for months, either to recover or to keep the court from noticing their fragility. Isolation compounded the suffering. During periods, many were expected to remain in private apartments, separated from the public and even from their husbands at times. Loneliness, shame, and physical pain intertwined. The layers of heavy dresses became more than fashion. They were both armor and prison. Even within the family, understanding was scarce. A king might see discomfort and call it weakness. Advisors might interpret fainting as theatrics. Women learned that acknowledging their own bodies could be dangerous. Yet despite centuries of oppression, some royal women found small ways to cope. Scented cloths, secret letters, whispered conversations with trusted attendants. These small acts of self-preservation became lifelines. They were ways to assert control in a world designed to strip it away, but the system did not forgive for long. Courts demanded appearances, heirs had to be produced. Blood had to follow rules. Women's health, autonomy, and dignity were secondary to the politics of royalty. The heavy dresses, invasive treatments, and strict hygiene were not the only price royal women paid for hiding their periods. Over time, the body itself bore permanent scars, physical, internal, and invisible to the public eye. Many women developed chronic infections. The reused linen rags and unsafe internal devices introduced bacteria directly into sensitive areas. Without proper medical care, these infections lingered, causing pain for years. Some led to infertility, pelvic inflammatory disease, or even death. Yet to the court, they remained invisible, a private suffering hidden beneath layers of silk and velvet. Hormonal damage was another consequence. Repeated use of strong herbs to suppress bleeding disrupted menstrual cycles. Some women experienced irregular bleeding for decades. Others suffered from extreme cramping, mood swings, and fatigue. Chronic pain became a part of daily life, silently endured so that appearances were never compromised. The corsets and tight bindings caused lasting structural damage. Rib cages were reshaped, organs shifted, and posture was altered permanently. Some women experienced shortness of breath, collapsed lungs, or hernias. Their bodies became a reflection of courtly expectations, a mixture of elegance and enforced suffering. Even mental scars persisted long after physical pain. Decades of shame, isolation, and constant surveillance left many royal women with anxiety, depression, and distrust. The court's obsession with cleanliness, fertility, and control shaped their perceptions of their own bodies forever. Letters and diaries reveal women haunted by fear of exposure, obsessed with bodily perfection, and constantly self-policing behaviors rooted in survival. Some sought escape through secrecy. They developed private rituals to cope, hidden cloths, herbal remedies of their own choosing, or even clandestine moments of rest during official appearances. These small acts were acts of defiance, yet the damage, both physical and emotional, was often irreversible. Historians today are only beginning to understand the long-term consequences. While portraits show serene faces framed by elaborate dresses, beneath the silk were women carrying pain, infection, and trauma. Royal courts demanded spectacle and perfection, but the cost was lifelong suffering. And despite all precautions, accidents still happened. A visible stain, a fainting episode, or a sudden illness could undo a woman's carefully maintained image. A single misstep could spark gossip, accusations of weakness, or political consequences that reverberated beyond her life. In royal courts, a woman's period was never just a personal matter. It was a political tool and sometimes a weapon. Royal bloodlines depended on heirs. Fertility was closely monitored, and menstruation was the key indicator. A queen who bled irregularly or heavily risked suspicion of infertility, one who stopped bleeding unexpectedly, could spark rumors of pregnancy. Both scenarios influenced marriages, alliances, and succession plans. Courtiers and advisors used this knowledge strategically. Information about a queen's cycle could be leveraged to gain favor or influence decisions. A well-informed advisor might warn a king about missed bleeding to suggest she was pregnant or, conversely, to suggest she was incapable of producing an heir. Blood became evidence in political maneuvering, often without the woman's knowledge. Some kingdoms even tested or inspected blood. In extreme cases, midwives or ladies-in-waiting reported on the color, flow, or timing of menstrual blood. Unusual characteristics were interpreted as signs of weakness, impurity, or divine disfavor. These reports shaped public perception and could affect diplomatic negotiations. Periods also affected public appearances. Royal women were sometimes forced to attend ceremonies while bleeding. Fainting or visible signs of discomfort were dangerous. It could be interpreted as weakness, indecisiveness, or moral failing. A queen who could not maintain composure even because of a natural bodily process risked scandal or political manipulation. Marriage politics were directly influenced by menstruation. Kings planned visits around fertile windows. Diplomatic unions depended on the queen's ability to conceive. A missed period could delay an alliance, create tension, or even provoke plots for replacement. Fertility and its visible indicator, menstruation, was an instrument of power in hands of the court. Even succession crises were tied to blood. History records multiple instances where disputed claims to the throne were linked to a queen's reproductive health. If menstruation failed to produce an heir, or if a young bride did not conceive in time, powerful families intervened. Royal women were at the center of political games they had no control over, and still the suffering remained hidden. While the court discussed blood quietly, the public often saw only elegance, grace, and composure. The truth that women endured immense pain, shame, and invasive scrutiny was kept secret. Yet their bodies carried the consequences of political decisions, sometimes paying the ultimate price. Centuries later, the heavy silk gowns and perfumed chambers remain in history books, celebrated for elegance and pageantry. But the hidden suffering of royal women, their pain, fear, and sacrifice lingers as a darker legacy. The practices they endured shaped more than their bodies. They shaped how society viewed women, blood, and power. Menstrual secrecy, shame, and control became normalized in elite circles. The notion that a woman's natural cycle must be hidden, managed, or suppressed passed quietly into broader culture, influencing generations beyond the palace walls. Physical scars left behind tell one story. Chronic infections, damaged reproductive systems, and the long-term effects of toxic herbs remind us of the human cost of beauty, obedience, and duty. Many royal women carried pain for life, hidden beneath layers of silk, sequins, and hoop skirts. Even today, some historians uncover evidence of ailments directly tied to these practices, proof that the past still whispers in bodies and records alike. Emotional scars tell another. Shame, secrecy, and fear left deep marks. Royal women learned to distrust their own bodies, to hide discomfort, and to obey even harmful instructions. Diaries and letters reveal anxiety, guilt, and quiet rebellion. Personal battles fought behind closed doors, while public images remained flawless. Their courage endures. Some quietly resisted. They sought small ways to reclaim control over their bodies, finding privacy, comfort, or rebellion in subtle acts. Their defiance may have been invisible to most, but it represents resilience under relentless scrutiny and danger. The political consequences are enduring too. Blood-shaped alliances, succession, and power. Fertility was a tool and a weapon. Menstruation a monitored signal in a world where life and leadership were inseparable. Many kingdoms' histories, from European courts to Asian dynasties, bear traces of decisions driven not by strategy alone, but by the control of women's bodies. Today, the story of royal menstruation challenges romanticized images of the past. It reminds us that luxury and power often came at an immense personal cost, that beauty could be a trap, and that the most private moments were weaponized in public life. Behind the puffy dresses, perfumed chambers, and golden tiaras, there are women enduring pain, humiliation, and control for centuries. Their suffering once hidden now serves as a warning. History is not just what we sit, it is also what was forced to remain invisible. The blood beneath the silk tells a story of endurance, cruelty, and resilience. And it demands we remember the human cost behind royal glamour.